Okay, let's get into our discussion. This is the last shiur for volume 22. We're going to talk about Tchumin. This is the last shiur in Hilchos Shabbos. We'll be doing Hilchos Shabbos for a number of volumes. This is the last one, the last shiur. The topic that we're talking about is Hotza'ah, and we spoke about Eruv and Eruv Chatzeros. And the last topic we're going to talk about is Tchumin. We'll start on page 348. Again, it's the Lax family edition of all of these volumes. This volume is Dr. Harold and Magda Katz, volume number 22. And the last discussion we'll have is Tchumin. So we know there is a halacha that walking more than 2,000 amos outside of a city is an isser. What level isser we'll have to see. But that's known as the pasuk says in B'Shalach, in source number 24. We're starting page 348, source number 24. The pasuk says in B'Shalach, Ru ki Hashem nasan lechem haShabbos, al keinu nasan lechem yom hashishi lechem yomayim. Hashem give you man on Erev Shabbos double. B'yishvu ish tachtav, Al Yetze Yishbim Komo B'Yom HaShvi. You know why the month fell twice on Friday? Because we don't want you to go out on Shabbos, right? The midbar is, that's a good question the Gemara talks about. What's the midbar? Is that a Carmelis? Is that a Rosh Hashanah? But you can't go out. Stay in your place. Al Yetze Yishbim Komo B'Yom HaShvi. Don't go out of your place B'Yom HaShvi. The Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Nun Aleph in the next words derives from here the Isser of going out of the Tchum. Hani Alpayim Ama Hechak Sivan. Where do we have the 2,000 amos written? The Tanya, Shvuish Tachtav, Elu Arba Amos. Shvuish Tachtav, that's 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah. Al Yetzi Yishbim Komo, Elu Alpayim Ama. That's 2,000 amos, that's the next step. Minalan, how do you know this? And there's a number of Gzeir Shabbos. Amar Chisda, Lamanu, Makom, Mimakom, Makom Nisa, a couple of stages of the Gzeir Shava that is learned. So there, you read that Gemara, it sounds like Alpayim Ama, 2,000 amos, Hechak Sivan, where is it written? It sounds like it's an Issa Daraisa. The Mishnah in Sota in the 5th parak, in source 26, in the next source, he learns it out from a different pshat. And Eliezer there, son of Rabbi Lili, argues with that source. Bo Bayam Darash Rabbi Akiva, beginning of the source 26. It says 2,000 amos outside of the city of the Levium, and one says 1,000. What are they referring to? Ef Shalom Elef Ama Shekvar Nemer Apayim Ama. Ef Shalom Apayim Shekvar Nemer Elef Ama. What's 1,000? What's 2,000? HaKetzad, Elaf Ama Migrash, says Rabbi Akiva, 1,000 for Migrash, like open land around the city for beauty. Alpayim Ama, Tchum Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says, Alpayim Ama, that's the Tchum. Tchum Shabbos, according to Rabbi Akiva, is learned that from the Psukim. Rabbi Eliezer, Benosh, Rabbi Yosef, Glili Omer, Elaf Ama Migrash, Alpayim Ama, Sados for Kramim. Nothing to do with Tchumin. You have open, and then you have fields afterwards, and that's how the Din D'Oraisa is to build the Arei Levium. What's the Nekudas Machlokas here? Whether the Isser of Tchumin is D'Oraisa or D'Rabbanan. That's the Machlokas. Rabbi Akiva Darshan Tchumin D'Oraisa. He learns that from the Psukim. 2,000 amos. While Rabbi Eliezer holds Tchumin is D'Rabbanan. The whole idea of going out of a Tchum is D'Rabbanan. A number of Gemaras give us the indication that we paskin Tchumin is D'Rabbanan. And that's what Rov Rishonim assume, that we assume that Tchumin Alpayim Amma, 2,000 amos, is D'Rabbanan. The machlokis is about the next step. What about the further, not 2,000 amos, but 24,000 amos, what's called Yud Beis Mil. So is that also D'Rabbanan, or is that Daraisa? So that's the machlokis Rishonim. The Rif and the Rambam all hold that Yud Beis Mil, that's an Issa Daraisa. The Rif says in source 28, based on the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi seems to hold this Daraisa, but how do you make Shalom between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi? Yerushalmi is talking about Tchum Yud Beis Mil. Higiyucha so Tchumei Shabbos, Yenim Mechuvaran Lecha, Dvar Torah. Rabbi Mana Boy Nichal Paimam and Mechuvar, Bar Saba, V'chui continues, Nimsu Achshav, after the Rif quotes the Yerushalmi, Tchumei Shabbos, Mehen D'Rabbanan, or Mehem D'Oraisa. Some limits are D'Rabbanan, some are D'Oraisa. Mal Paimam V'Lamala Yud Beis Mil, Loka Alein Midrabanan. If it's further than 2,000 amos out up until Yud Beis Mil, that's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Rabbi Akiva holds even that's an Issa D'Oraisa. We don't pass him like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds even 2,000 mil but Yud Beis Mil, 12 mil, 24,000 amos, that is D'Oraisa D'Rabbi Yaakov. We quote the pasuk that's learned that from the first source that we learned. Tani Yud Beis Mil Keneged Machar Yisrael. Ma'apayim Amav Lamato, less than 2,000 amos, that is mutter. And the Rambam also paskins this way, the chiluk of 2,000 amos D'Rabbanan and Alpayim Amma and Yud Beis Mil being D'Oraisa. The Rambam says, Hayotzi Chutz L'Tchum HaMedina B'Shabbos Lokeh. But the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shabbos, it says you get malchus for the tchum, but it doesn't know how much. Avol Chachamim had tiku. The Chachamim teach us shetchum zehu chutz l'shnei maser mil keneged machane Yisrael. 12 mil. V'kach amar le Moshe Rabbeinu lo tetzei chutz lamachane. How much big was the Machane Yisrael? Yud Beis Mil. U'medevei sofrim shelo yetzi adam chutz la'ir ela ad alpayim amma. Up to 2,000 amos is the din d'Rabbanan. Bali Tosfos say, and the Rosh says, no such thing. Everything about Tchumin is d'Rabbanan. There's no such thing as Yud Beis Mil being d'Oraisa. Everything is d'Rabbanan. That's what Tosfos says. You have many places. Tosfos says in Eruvin Yud Zayin, the end of the first parak in Eruvin, source number 30. B'chol duchta pshita leila hashas de'eruvei Tchumin d'Rabbanan. It's the Gemara assumes that way, that all Tchumin, the Gemara is never machalik between d'Oraisa and d'Rabbanan 2,000 Yud Beis Mil. The Gemara never says that. So the Rif and the Rama put the Yerushalmi and the Bavli together and came up, but the Tosfos says, look in the Bavli. To Amalei Rav Nachman, Manai Tana Davilu d'Rabbanan les lebrero. Who's the one that says d'Rabbanan? They always pin in on Rabbi Akiva. He's the one. He's the one that's noted as the sheet that says Tchumin is d'Oraisa. Hotzah is d'Oraisa, but Tchumin is d'Rabbanan. That's the sheet of Tosfos. That's the sheet of the Rosh in the first parak of Eruvin as well. But Tchumin Alpayim Mama is for sure d'Rabbanan. Because it's d'Rabbanan, the Chachamim gave a couple of kulas, leniencies for this din of 2,000 amos. Again, Bisman Hazeh, if we're generally walking from within a city, as long as there's residents, sometimes you can walk for an hour, and there's constant residential neighborhood, and there's no Tchum there. It's only once you get outside, in the days when you live someplace in the middle of nowhere, nothing around you, that's where you get into issues of Tchum. So one leniency, because Tchumin is d'Rabbanan, the 2,000 amos, one kula is that it only doesn't start. Where does Tchum start from? Let's say you don't have a city that's a perfect circle or perfect square. It's the unusual shape, and there's points. So the Mishnah says in Eruvin, you know what you could do? You could square off. Wherever you find the furthermost out house, square from there. Even though it includes a lot more than we would have thought, and that's enough for the Tchum. Ketzan Ma'abra, that's what we call, we impregnate the city, the Mishnah says. And Ketzan Ma'abra is the name of the parak, fifth parak. Ketzan Ma'abra is Arin 31, Bayis Nechnas, Bayis Yotzei. Pogim Nechnas, Pogim Yotzei. You have a house here, a house there, a little tower. Hayusham Gedudios, Kvosas Aratfachim. You have other types of structures, Gesharm and Afashos. There's a cemetery. Motzinas Amida Kinegdon. You measure from outside. You make a rectangle so that you even get the corners of the rectangle, which are further than 2,000 amos. If you look at the picture, they have a picture here on page 352. You have the city inside the square, and then the corners are, you can go 2,800 amos out. It's more than 2,000 amos, but that's the halacha. Because all thing is d'Rabbanan, you're able to measure it like this, and you square it. You square the city, or you make it into a rectangle, rather than a circular one. You don't go a circle with 2,000 amos. That is the radius. No, you don't do that. You get a more makel, more flexible shiur. V'osno, so it says Rashi, is a Tchumin M'Rabanan. Kadeshi Yehe Alpayim L'Sadin Kibe'emsa. You have 2,000. V'lo Agulin, you don't make it circle. Right? So you have even more on the diagonals. If the city is already square or rectangular, you don't have to go beyond that. It's already a square. If it already is has walls around it. But there is a question, if the city is square rectangular, but it's not exactly in the way that the cardinal directions are, as it's called. Let's say it's diagonal, that it's like a diamond. So the Mishnah in Eruvin there, the Mar'evin says that you just draw from those sides, and we don't create a bigger rectangle. Merubah is Ozlon Zavio, says the Gemara Pshita in source 31, Daf Nun Hey, Lotzricha de Merubah v'lo Mirba Kibrua Olam. What if it's rectangular or square, but not in the way the world is? Mao de Tema Olam, you might see you get to square it even more. Kamash Malan. If it's already a square, even if it's not exactly in the directions of north, south, east, west, that's it. That's the square, and then you do 2,000 amos from the outside of the square. There is a machlokas achronim. What if one of the sides is straight? A bunch of the sides are not. One of the sides is straight. So what do you do there? So the Chai Adam says, we extend the city on this side, right? Forming the side of a rectangle in the cardinal directions. Maybe you have a picture of it on the next page, on page 354. That's a picture of Manhattan. How do you measure the square of Manhattan? So the Chai Adam would say that you take that the one straight side, but you go to the cardinal directions and you make a rectangle around it. And that's what the Chai Adam says in 34. You take that corner, extend the city on that side also, and because it's not straight, so you build a square around it. Because it's one diagonal line, so you don't make it diagonal, you make it straight, going in the proper directions. The Chazon Ish argues, he says, no, If it's a straight line on one side, you use that line as the rectangle. You don't go outside of that line. You use that one line as the rectangle. That's the Chazon Ish. You don't extend the city on the straight side. You just make it diagonal, and that's the picture that we have on page 3054 on the left side of the Chazon Ish. So that is, but number one kula is that you're allowed to be ma'aber the city. You make that square or rectangle around it. Another kula is that we don't dafka measure, according to some Tanoim, directly from the edge. You have to make that square, including the the final house, the most external house. No, you might measure from another 70 2/3 amos out. The Mishnah says that's called karpef. Karpef says the Mishnah in Eruvin, and that's the second Mishnah there in Parakes Ma'abed. Notice in karpef le'eruvin, Meir says you always measure. A karpef is a little more than 70 amos. You always measure that before, so it's 2,070 and about that. That's added to every city. That's Rabbi Meir. Chacham say no, not every city gets that. No, the karpef is used only if you have two cities next to each other. And having those 70 2/3 around each city will combine the two cities, so it'll be 141 or so. So then you can make them into one big city and build a tchum around that. That's the chachamim. Not that every city by itself gets a karpef and you measure from outside. The din of karpef is about two cities. The chachamim omrim lo omru karpef lebein shtei ayaros. And yesh lezu shivamam v'shirayim. Lezu shivamam v'shirayim. Or say karpef has shtei lios echad, and you could combine the two. Or even more than two. V'chein continues the Mishnah. Shlosha kfarim, the top of 355. Right? 3 villages. Em yesh bein shnayim achitzonim. They have arba'im achas v'shlish. Also, I'm sorry, shlosh lios echad. You could combine all 3 to make them into one big happy city. So this is a machlokas tanon. What do we paskin about this? So again, it's a machlokas rishonim. What we paskin in this case. The Shulchan Aruch following the Rambam is machmer like the Chachamim. Karpef is not automatic, it's just for 2 cities, while the Ramah is meko like Rabbi Meir. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Shin Tzadiches, right? This is all in the 4th volume of the Mishnah Berurah. Kol beis dirashu yotze me'ir, any city that is sticking out of a city. If it's connected to the other city within that, and as long as a house is within 70 2/3 from a city, that's all. And if it's 2 cities, you combine the cities. When you measure the 2,000 amos, it's from outside of that house. The Yesh Omrim, says the Ramah, you don't start from the edge of the house. It's true that it's 70 2/3 connects the house, but then you go another. From every edge of a house, right, you measure 70 2/3 amos. Says the Ramah, so again, we paskin combining the 2 cities, but the Ramah paskins like Rabbi Meir that every tchum starts only 70 amos out. The Mishnah discusses how to measure in those days. How could be so exact, 2,000 amos. So the Mishnah gives you some strategies in that parak how to measure. Says the Mishnah there, source 38. You don't use very long ropes, which could sag or it's harder to hold taut. Use 50 amma ropes, and then you go and you keep measuring it from section to section. Where do you hold it to make sure it's not one person's feet and one person's chest? There, if you get to a mountain, how do you measure a mountain? You're not going to measure going up. Tchum goes flat. So what do you do? What's called mavlio v'chozol midaso. You could either, if you have a big ditch, you could measure straight over the ditch. You have a big mountain, you have what's called, you figure out, maybe you go next to the mountain, or you do what's called mekadrin. The Mishnah in Eruvin discusses that the person on the bottom of the mountain holds it higher, and the person on the top of the mountain holds it by his feet. So it's all horizontal ropes and not vertical. So that's how it was done in the days of the Mishnah. Rav Malamed writes, nowadays we use satellite pictures. There's much easier and more exact ways of using it, and that's what we do. There's no din. Like Eglah Rufa, there's a special halachas of Medida. Here, this din, which again, according to the Bali Tosfos and the Rosh, is all Durabanan anyway. Even according to the Rosh, the 2,000 amos is Durabanan, according to the Rambam in the Rif. But you can measure it with the tools that we have. Kiyom atif likvor tchum Shabbos al pi mapot shemevusasod al tzilumei avir. Pictures from air, o be'ezras machshir shenazorim be livyanim, right, the satellites. Shal piem nitan limdodas amerchakim bofam meduyak biyoseh. It can be very exact. Very exact, that's what you should do. So again, how much is that? So 2,000 amos in our terms is generally a little bit less than a kilometer. That's what he quotes on 357. So according to Malamed, one can measure this distance using maps and satellites just under a kilometer. is going to be the Tchum. He notes here in the notes that many cities today, you go to the Merkaz, and you have Tel Aviv and Bnei Brak, and you have many cities right near each other. And so if there could be that, although they're one big Tchum, right? For Hilchas Yichud, maybe it's called a different city. That's a discussion. But for Hilchas Tchum, if it's the residence continues, so then it could be much farther out. So step one is that there's something called Tchum Shabbos. Step two, what about if you go out of the Tchum? So you're stuck. It says the Mishnah in the fourth parak in Eruvin, if you go out of the Tchum, you have 4 amos. You can't walk more than that. Right? Mishotziu Nakrim, you went out against your will, hurrah. Right? You went out and you were in a daze. You didn't go out on purpose. Ein lo ela arba amos. We're sorry, but 4 amos is all you have to walk for the rest of Shabbos. There's a machlokes. Is the 4? Are you in the middle of the 4 amos? You can walk only 2, or could you walk any 4 amos? Hechziru kilo yatsa. If the goyim took you out and then brought you back, okay, you're like beforehand kilo yatsa, as if you didn't go out. Holy chuli or acheres. What if they dumped you in a different city? So you're in a city, but you're not it wasn't in your Tchum when Shabbos started. Nasu b'tiro b'sa'ar, that's a machlokes. Once you're inside another area, enclosed area, like a city, so then you could walk whatever you want, even though it's a different Tchum. And if you're Rabbi Kiva Omer, no, you're outside your Tchum, ein lo ela arba amos. There's lumdis there, but not for now. Maisa, the Mishnah tells a story, Shabo mi paldan da'asrin, if Liko b'sfnasa mayam, they were coming on a boat. Rabbi Azariah walked the whole boat. And Rishon and Rabbi Kiva didn't move. They stayed within their 4 amos. The Shulchan Aruch is Mako, in this case, by show. If one left b'shogeg and one came back in, what if one left b'mezid? If one left b'mezid and then he wants to come back in, whether b'shogeg or b'mezid, so then Aruch is machmer in that case that he cannot walk throughout. Nasnu gayam chutz l'tchum b'dira b'sar b'mara o b'yir acheres mukavas chom l'dira. Or shenanigans. There was anytime it's out of your control, and you were put into another tchum, another city, another pen, then you can walk. Everybody agrees malachas kula. Avalim yatsa. That's what we hold. The Shulchan Aruch is makeup. But if you went up b'mezid, av bishu b'toch echan me'ilu ein lo ela arba. Said if you're in a different city, I'm not mako there. Only if you were put there against your will, I'm my mako. But not in a case where you went up b'mezid. What if one came back to the original city? He went up b'mezid, but he came back. So then the Shulchan Aruch says, then we're making you're back where you started. Even though you went out, you shouldn't have gone out, but here you went back where you started. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch says in 42. Yatsa ladas, you went out and you were brought back, ein lo ela arba amos. If the el miyun hechziru li'iro, the Shulchan Aruch says, if you went up amazed and you're in a different tchum, machmir. But if you came out to the same tchum, then it's mutter. The Beis Meir argues with the Ramah. The Ramah quotes here that it's only if they return you to a city of mukefes mechitzos. No, if it came back to your city, the Beis Meir assumes that you can make leave it without mukefes mechitzos, and that's what the Bir Halacha also happens to say. So, number 1, tchum. Number 2, if you went out of the tchum. Number 3, erev tchumin. Erev tchumin. What happens? Many mishnayos about this in Aaron. What if I want to extend my tchum? I know there's a great shiur going on in the next city, and it's within 4,000 amos of my city, but I'm not going to get there. It's not 2,000. So as we know, one could establish their center of life on Shabbos, their Makam Shvisa, in a place outside their city, right? If I don't do anything, then my city is my Makam Shvisa, and my Tchum starts outside my city, maybe 70 amos outside my city. But if I want to extend it, we have what's called an Erev Tchumin. Chazal instituted the possibility of establishing one's base for Shabbos in a different place. And how or way? There are 3 ways to create an Erev Tchum. 3 ways, as we'll see. Number 1 is verbal declaration. The Mishnah says in Eruvin, right, I'm walking on the place, and I see my city in front of me. I'm not there yet, but I see a tree. There's a tree outside the city that's within 2,000 amos of where I am, and it's within 2,000 amos of my city. So I can see the tree. I'm like, and it's almost Shabbos. I'm like, that's where my shvisa is. My makam shvisa, my base for Shabbos is at the root of that tree. I can walk as long as the tree is within 2,000 amos. I can walk there. And then from that tree to my house. Then you can have 4,000 amos. 4,000 amos. But again, that's only if you could get there when, as we described, each thing is less than 2,000 amos, right? Says the Gemara there on Daf Nun. Shisa CBE karo malach makam rangam adikaro pai mama. When we call the base all pai mama, amar rava v'utachi rohit li karo mati. That's only if, right? If he could get there before Shabbos. If you could run there before Shabbos. Either way, that's number one, verbal. Number two is what happens if one goes to the place and I'm going to stand there. I'm like, okay, this is where my Makan Shvisa is going to be on Shabbos. Does that work? Does that work to go stand there? So that's a machlokas to know whether that works. Says the Mishnah. Does that work, or do you have to put food there? Do we say walking there only is good for an ani who might not have the food to put there, or it's good for everybody? That's a machlokas. I don't know anything about the trees and if that's in the rishus. Amar shvisasi bimkomi, and I say my shvisa should be in my place. Zachalov mekoma by mama. I say this is where my shvisa should be. 2,000 amos. Zui sha'amru ha'ani mahalik baraglav, and that's what the Tanna Kama says. An ani doesn't have to put down any food. He could just be mahalik baraglav. Amar Rabbi Meir, ano in lana la ani. Meir says that's only for an ani could use that. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Echad ani ve'echad ashir. No, you're allowed to, even an ashir, you don't have to use food. You could just go there and say, Shvi'as Hazim Komi. So either seeing it verbal, that's my spot, or going there, this is my spot. And number three, which is implicit in the mission that we just read, number three is putting food down there. That is my makom. The Shulchan Aruch, or Mako, like Rabbi Yehuda, what does the Shulchan Aruch say? Ketzad asiyas erev. Shulchan Aruch, siman tough test. Imroz alelech b'sof atchum, o b'sof alach sham, zui gir mitzvaso. If you want to go there, that's fine. That's fine to go there. Even if you didn't say anything, you went somewhere, right? You could say something even if you're not there. And you could go somewhere even without saying something. Both of those work separately. Doesn't matter whether they're kavanah to go there. Right now, if you're there, and that's what you want to have your shvisa, kanal upon mama, below amira, it works. So that is going there. And what about food? So the Shulchan Aruch says what exactly you do. And this is Halacha L'maisa, what one would do to create an Erev Tchum. You have to go on Friday and put enough for 2 meals. And this is more machmir than Erev Chatzir, the Shituf Mavos. You have to put 2 meals per person. Per person. That's going to use the Erev. From bread, anything you want to use. If it's lifton, if it's a dip, we'll get to this. So, whatever dip you could use for 2 meals, sagi that also. And you say there, through this Erev, I want to be allowed to walk 2,000 amos from this spot. You go home, and then tomorrow morning you can walk another 2,000 amos beyond this spot. The Mishnah Brura notes, as we just said, that this is that you have to be careful. If you're sending an Erev Tchum for a number of people, you have to have a lot of food there. Sarach mazon, Mishnah Brura says, linyan shir shtei sudos bekan sarach mazon shtei sudos. Ma'achol o lifton l'chol echad v'echad b'fnei atzmo. Afilu b'alavayis b'nei beso. Even if you have a whole family, you have to have enough for each family member. Sarach la'aniyach l'chol echad shir erev chutz mibro katan, who will use it. So it's interesting. We would have thought, okay, you have to do so much. You have to leave so much. Rav Rimon, in the Sefer on the laws of the army, he writes, I have a great idea. Just put a jar of jelly. Because what did it say? Bread or a dip or a spread that could be used for everybody for 2 meals. So if you have a jar of jelly, that's enough for 2 meals for a family. Right? That's what he says to use. That's what's easiest. He writes in source 50. As an easy source, you don't have to take bread. Some type of spread. Enough spread to be enough for the bread that everybody would come. So he says 1 bottle of riba should be enough. One is allowed to prepare an Erev for the next month. I don't have to put the Erev there every single Shabbos. Just like Erev Chatzeros, you could do it for the whole year. So you can prepare an Erev Tchum for many Shabbosos. And also, I can prepare the Erev and sometimes use it and sometimes not. Doesn't that dafka have to be the same? Says the Gemara in Erevin, Lamed Vav. Hareini ma'akev ma'ariv Shabbosos l'kol Shana. Ratzisi elech, ratzisi lo ratzisi lo elech. I'll decide. Here, yes, no. Ratzimi bod yom, Eruv o Erev. So, as long as you could get there on Friday, Eruv o Erev. Mishach ha'shecha. What about after Shabbos? Can one delay deciding until you put it there? I'm going to decide late. Yes. Machlokas Tanoim, Rabbi Shimon says you're allowed to decide even on Shabbos. And the Shulchan Aruch rules Lekulav, in the source 52. Whichever Shabbos I want to use it, I'm going to go. You can decide Shabbos morning. That is based on the sugya of Breira. Breira is when something is clarified. Do we say that the roots of that clarification are seen in the past? And that's what this halacha is based on, right? Remember, we poskin b'drabanan yesh breira, right? So that's this is a din drabanan. So that's why lachor we would say yesh breira. One should note that when making an erev tchum, you're like the Mishnah describes. If I might extend in one direction, but then I lose in the other direction, and sometimes I lose even within what I'm trying to do. Sometimes, as we will see, it doesn't usually increase the area, but merely it changes my center. The Gemara in Eruvin even says that if after setting, let's say I put an erev tchum, and now my entire city is not within 2,000 amos of my tchum, so that's a limiting factor, right? If after setting an erev tchum, one city is no longer entirely within 2,000 amos, one's tchum is only the 2,000 square amos with the erev at its center, which is not extended because of the city. If I don't start something, I go the whole city and then 2,000 amos out. But if I change my center and I put it outside, so then there could be a great reduction in my erev. For the Gemara, the question is, what if the whole city is included in the 2,000? So that's a machlokas. But the Gemara in Daf Samach, Mashiniskar hu mafsid, Mashiniskar v'sulo, v'chule continues, and the Gemara ends off by saying, Kol sa midaso b'sof ha'ir, nasis lo ha'ir kula ka'arba amos u'mashlim noas hashar. If the whole city is within the 2,000 amos, then the whole city is called 4 amos. And you could be mashlim beyond that, right? You have put it 1,000 amos outside the city, so it's 1,004 amos, and you could do another 996 in the other direction. But if it's not included within the 2,000, so then I only go up to that spot. That's what it seems to be. The Rambam, Machlokas quoted here between the Rambam and the Tur, the Rambam says that one cannot leave the square described above, even if one stays within the city. The Rambam says if one's new tchum still includes the city, then the entire city is 4 amos, and you could continue walking, as I said, 1996 on the other side. Says the Rambam. In source 54. You can walk 2,000 amos in all the directions of your eruv. If you're walking back towards your country, you go up to where the 2,000 amos ends in your city. If the whole Medina is within, but then it could all be called 4 amos. And then you have 1,004, and then another 996. But the Torah argues in his Meiko and says even if the city is not entirely contained in the Erev, you can walk throughout the city. But it doesn't end mamish in the middle. The Gemara is limiting travel based on the person's new tchum only if you're going beyond the city. You can't go beyond. That's the Torah is Meiko in that regard. Never stop in the middle of the city. The Torah says in 55, as eno kola ka'arba amos. It's not called 4 amos so that you could walk outside more, but it's called 4 amos that you can walk the whole city. That's the tour. He knows that the Rambam argues, but he argues on the Rambam. This is machlokas between the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Shulchan Aruch is machmer like the Rambam, as you would have guessed. Ishmaelach b'yir elat sof midaso Ramah v'yesh omrim dafilu kolsa midaso b'emso ha'ir. Even if it ends in the middle of the city, malach b'chuli or kuli, you can walk the whole city and not out v'yesh. The quotes the view of the tour, quoted in the Ramah, that we're Meiko, as long as you're sleeping there. As long as you're sleeping, that's the filik of the Mishnah Berurah. Right? If you slept at home, then you could have the whole city. It can't be limited. But if you slept at the location of your erev tchum, or one sleeps at home, but the tchum ends in the middle of another city, so then it's more limited. One final point, and that is regarding a bracha. The Rambam writes in Hilchas Erev, and you make a bracha on erev tchumin. Make a bracha. Just like you make a bracha on eruv chatzeros, v'shitufe mavos, kach mevarchen al eruv tchumin. You make a bracha. Bracha asher kedushanim v'zov zivanu al mitzvahs erev. Just like you say on erev tavshilin, just like you say on erev chatzeros, the same bracha you say on erev tchum. And the Ravid is very upset. He says, I don't know what mitzvah there is to set an erev tchum. Erev chatzeros, the Rabbanan said, this is how you carry it. There's an isser, and to be mad to the isser. But tchum, you're in the city. Just stay in your city. What's the mitzvah to go out of your city? Says the Ravid. Hey, says the Ravid in 59, the end of the 6th parak in Nervin. I understand by Erev Chatzeros Yishlam Heker l'Shabbos Shalahotzi l'Rosh Hashanah. It's a hecker, so you don't. It's a preventative measure. Elaha kula nafkin Shabbos. That's a preventing isurim. Here, this is matering. This is matering you to go somewhere, right? If it's a gzeira, to make sure you don't. Okay, I understand that. But this is matering. The avo pishin ma'arvin el dvar mitzvah. And even though, yes, we poskin, says the Ravid, that you can't make an erev tchum unless you're doing it to do a mitzvah, but the erev tchum in itself is not a mitzvah, even if that's the goal that you're allowed to. Eina mitzvah nogas le'eruv, right? The purpose of the what you want to do it for, that's the motivation, but that's not the definition of the eruv. The Ravid says, I don't think there should be a bracha. Eina mitzvah ve'ech yomer v'tzivanu al mitzvahs eruv. That's the Machlokas Rambam Ravid. The Magen Mishnah defends the Rambam and says no. He says it's even more of a reason to make a bracha by erev tchum than it is by erev chatzeros. The isser of leaving the tchum remains intact after your erev tchum. You didn't change anything. You're keeping the din. Says the Magen Mishnah, Va'ani omer di yoser levarach al rubi tchumin. Even more of a reason why imitam kula v'chumrahu. Lefi sheyadua shedvar Torah mutal hotzi min abatim lachatzeros ulam avos below shum erev midaraisa. You don't need anything for erev chatzeros. The Chachamim created this isser and they mounted it by an erev. When we want to take out, we're doing it like the Rabbanan said, by Netilas Yadayim and Shchita. According to Minat Torah, you can carry whatever you want, right? Past Alpayim Amma. We're following the din of the Torah. So he says maybe even more so. Either way, Machlokes, Machaber, the Machaber, and the Ramah, Shulchan Aruch like the Rambam. Rav Soloveitchik used this Rambam as an example of his special type of Birchas HaMitzvah. Rav Soloveitchik noted that there are two types of Birchas HaMitzvah. There's a Birchas HaMitzvah on a Maisa HaMitzvah, that's most of the time, and sometimes there's a Birchas HaMitzvah on a Chalos HaMitzvah, where the mitzvah helps achieve a new status. Sometimes there's an extra bracha, sometimes there's just a fancy bracha. So, by Bris Milah, there's two brachas, Milah and Lachniso. So, you might say Lachniso is a Birchas Shevach, which happens to be done in the context of a mitzvah always, or, says Rav Soloveitchik, no. Allah Milah is the bracha of the Maisa Milah that's said by the Moel. Lachniso is said by the father. It's a bracha on the Chalos mitzvah, that now the child is a Mohol. There's a new status. And that's why there's a fancy bracha by marriage. The Tzivan al Arayos, Vaslan Sarusos, is that a Birchas Shevach? Says Rav Soloveitchik, no, it's a Birchas HaMitzvah. That is a bracha on a chalos. Now she's an Eishes Ish. Why sometimes there's a separate bracha and sometimes not? Question. But that could also be the pshat of, again, bris milah and marriage, and maybe shchita, Rav Soloveitchik said, but maybe also, he has it by tefillin also, that's his chiddush, that there's a chalos by tefillin based on a Rambam, but they thought maybe by erev and tru, there's a chalos shvisa. And that's the bracha on the chalos of the new chalos, but erev chatzeros is not really a chalos. But it's matering the Isser. But here there's a new Chalosh Visa, and that would be the bracha. The final point was what the Ravid mentioned, and that is Erev Tchum is only made l'shem mitzvah. If I want to go to hear a shiur in the other town, I could set an Erev Tchum. That's we paskin ein ma'arvin elo l'dvar mitzvah. We are flexible in terms of how to define mitzvahs, even if it's not a mitzvah. Here's a discussion. The Bahag says if it's not for a shem mitzvah, then it doesn't even work. That's the Bahag and the Halachas Gedolos. The Rambam paskins that, but the Evid, it does work. It does work. The Rambam says, Var mitzvah is to go visit a Beis Avel, interesting, on Shabbos. Mishta shal nisu and a shever brachas, lakwa pnei rabo. But if an erev, shalo lechem mikol elu harize erev. But what if you want to just take a walk? And you enjoy that. That's also a mitzvah. You want to take a walk, you want to enjoy Shabbos. Right? That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. The Ramah says, O sharotza l'tayel, b'yantif, O Shabbos, but pardes. You want to take a walk, sheish bo simcha, bazem mikri dvar mitzvah. We could be flexible in terms of dvar mitzvah. If it's any type of onik Shabbos, it would be okay. The Shmir Shabbos summarizes some of the last halachas of Erev Tchum. You have to put it in a place that's guarded. I'm in 66. That's to be there the entire Ben Hashmashas. If it gets lost after Ben Hashmashas, it's okay, as long as it was there all Ben Hashmashas. If it got lost beforehand, before Ben Hashmashas, then it's no good. Then there's no Erev there. But if it got lost afterwards, the Mishnayos and the Shmir Shabbos says, Hareza Erev, that is word. So what do? You make the bracha, and then you say, Bazeh Erev. You say the whole nusach, just like the Erev, you have a nusach by Erev Chatzeros, you have a nusach by Erev Tavshilin, You have an esrog by Erev, and one can do that for all the inhabitants of the city, right? One person. But again, you got to put enough there. Put a couple of bottles of peanut butter and jelly there. But if people know about it, anyone who knew about it before Ben Hashmashos could rely on it. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Hamariv l'Rabbi mishalo. Ha'omar harizeh Erev b'shel kol b'nei ha'ir. As long as there's enough food, as we said, you have to be mezakah to them with somebody else. You have to let them know. Whoever knew about it beforehand, remember, we said before, you don't have to decide whether to use it or not till on Shabbos, but you have to know about it. As long as you knew about it before Shabbos, that is okay. This takes us through Erev Tchumin, and Chaseros. This finishes all the volumes. We can make a siyum on Hilchos Shabbos, the Tzurba M'Rabanan volumes on Hilchos Shabbos. Mazel tov, mazel tov.